What happens when a beloved actor tries to have a respectful conversation about his craft, only to be met with cruel mockery and relentless attacks from a shock jock who clearly woke up on the wrong side of the bed? In just 14 seconds, Howard Stern managed to destroy years of goodwill and show his true colors in front of millions of viewers during what should have been a simple promotional interview. Last night, Pedro Pascal, the star everyone adores from The Mandalorian and The Last of Us, walked into what he thought would be a friendly chat about his latest project. Instead, he found himself facing down one of radio's most notorious personalities in what quickly became a verbal bloodbath that left audiences stunned and disgusted. This is the exclusive breakdown of exactly what went down during those shocking 20 minutes of live television that had social media exploding and fans rallying behind their favorite actor. Pedro Pascal entered the studio with his trademark warm smile. Dressed casually in a simple black sweater and jeans, he waved to the small studio audience, who cheered loudly for the Chilean-American actor who had captured hearts worldwide with his genuine personality and incredible performances. Howard Stern sat behind his massive desk, already looking irritated before Pedro even took his seat. The radio host had his arms crossed and was tapping his fingers impatiently on the surface, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere that viewers could feel through their screens. "So, Pedro," Howard began, not even waiting for his guest to get comfortable, "I have to ask you something that's been bothering me. Do you actually think you're a good actor, or do you just get lucky with these roles?" The question hit like a slap. Pedro's smile faltered for just a moment, clearly caught off guard by the hostile tone. The studio audience went silent, sensing the tension immediately. "Well, Howard," Pedro replied diplomatically, maintaining his composure, "I think I work really hard to bring authenticity to every character I play. I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had, and I always try to give my best performance." Howard rolled his eyes dramatically and let out a loud, exaggerated sigh that echoed through the studio microphones. "Oh, please," Howard said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Spare me the humble act. You're telling me that putting on a helmet for most of a series makes you some kind of method actor? Come on." Pedro shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable, but still trying to keep things professional. The Mandalorian required a lot more than just wearing a helmet, Howard. There's physical acting, voice work, and emotional depth even when your face isn't visible. "Emotional depth?" Howard laughed harshly, slapping his hand on the desk. "You stand there in a costume and say a few lines. My intern could probably do that." The audience began to murmur uncomfortably. Even Howard's usual supporters in the crowd seemed taken aback by his unnecessarily aggressive approach. Pedro took a deep breath, his jaw tightening slightly. "I understand you might not appreciate the craft that goes into it, but there's a lot of preparation and skill involved in bringing these characters to life." "Craft?" Howard's voice got louder and more mocking. "What craft? Walking around in a metal suit? Please. And don't get me started on that zombie show. You just run around screaming and crying. Where's the craft in that?" "The Last of Us is about human connection and survival," Pedro said firmly, his voice still controlled but with an edge now. "It's about portraying real emotion in impossible circumstances." Howard leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Real emotion? You mean like the fake crying you did in that one scene? I've seen better acting in soap commercials." The insult hung in the air like poison. Pedro's hands clenched slightly in his lap, but he maintained his dignity. "I put everything I have into that role," Pedro said quietly. "It means a lot to me and to the fans who connect with the story." "Fans?" Howard scoffed. "You mean people who don't know what good acting looks like? Listen, Pedro, let me give you some advice. Maybe try taking some real acting classes instead of just relying on your pretty face." The comment about Pedro's appearance crossed a line that even Howard's most loyal listeners found uncomfortable. The studio audience was now clearly on Pedro's side, with several people shaking their heads in disgust. Pedro sat up straighter, his diplomatic facade finally beginning to crack. "Howard, I came here to talk about my work respectfully. I'm not sure why you're choosing to attack me personally." "Attack you?" Howard threw his hands up in mock innocence. "I'm just being honest. Something you Hollywood types aren't used to, I guess. You want everyone to kiss your feet just because you're on television." "I don't want anyone to kiss my feet," Pedro replied, his voice getting stronger. "I just want basic respect as a professional." Howard laughed again, this time even louder and more obnoxious. "Professional? You call what you do professional? I've been in this business longer than you've been alive, kid. I know real talent when I see it, and frankly, I'm not impressed." The word "kid" was delivered with such condescension that several audience members actually gasped. Pedro was clearly a grown man in his late 40s, and being talked down to like a child was beyond insulting. "I'm not a kid, Howard," Pedro said, his voice now carrying real anger. I'm a working actor who's earned his place in this industry through years of dedication and hard work. Hard work? Howard stood up from his chair dramatically. Hard work is what I do every day, getting up at 4 in the morning to entertain millions of people. What you do is play, dress up for a few months, and then disappear until your next paycheck. Pedro stood up as well, clearly having reached his breaking point with Howard's relentless disrespect. You know what, Howard? Pedro said, his voice steady but filled with controlled fury. I came here as your guest, and you've done nothing but insult me from the moment I sat down. What's your problem? Howard's eyes lit up with malicious glee, clearly thrilled that he had finally gotten under Pedro's skin. My problem? My problem is actors like you who think they deserve respect just for existing. You haven't earned anything. The studio audience was now openly uncomfortable, with several people actually getting up and walking toward the exits. The cameramen kept rolling, knowing they were witnessing television history in the making. I haven't earned anything? Pedro repeated, his voice rising for the first time. I've been working as an actor for over 20 years. I've done theater, independent films, television. I've put in the work. Theater? Howard practically shrieked with laughter. Oh, that's rich. You mean standing on a stage in front of 12 people pretending to be Shakespeare? That's not real work. That's just expensive hobbies for people who can't get real jobs. Pedro's face flushed red with anger. The insult to theater, something he clearly held sacred, had struck a deep nerve. Theater is where I learned my craft, Pedro said through gritted teeth. It's where I developed the skills that got me to where I am today. Don't you dare mock something you clearly know nothing about? Howard waved his hand dismissively. I know enough to recognize when someone's wasting everyone's time. You want to know what real entertainment looks like? Look at this show. Look at what I've built. 20, 30 million listeners every single day. Congratulations, Pedro said sarcastically. You've built a career on being cruel to people. What an accomplishment. The comment hit Howard like a physical blow. His face went from amused to furious in an instant. Cruel? Howard's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. I tell the truth. Something your precious Hollywood doesn't understand. You live in a bubble where everyone tells you how wonderful you are. But out here in the real world, we see right through the act. What act? Pedro demanded, taking a step closer to Howard's desk. I'm not putting on an act. This is who I am. I treat people with respect because that's how human beings should treat each other. Human beings? Howard laughed coldly. You're not a human being, Pedro. You're a product. You're something that gets packaged and sold to audiences who don't know any better. The insult was so dehumanizing that several audience members audibly gasped. Pedro stood frozen for a moment, clearly struggling to process the depth of Howard's cruelty. That's enough, Pedro said quietly, his voice shaking with rage. I'm done with this. He turned to walk away, but Howard wasn't finished. That's right. Run away, Howard called after him mockingly. That's what you Hollywood types do when someone tells you the truth. You can't handle reality. Pedro stopped dead in his tracks. He slowly turned back around, and the look in his eyes made everyone in the studio hold their breath. You want to talk about reality? Pedro said, his voice now ice cold. Let me tell you about reality, Howard. Reality is that you're a bitter, angry man who gets his kicks from tearing down people who are actually trying to create something meaningful in this world. Howard's smug expression finally began to crack. Excuse me? You heard me, Pedro continued, taking another step forward. You sit in this studio every day spreading negativity and hate, and you call it entertainment. You mock people's dreams, their passions, their life's work, and you think that makes you some kind of truth teller? The studio was dead silent, except for the sound of cameras recording every word. The truth is, Pedro went on, his voice getting stronger, you're jealous. You're jealous of anyone who creates art, who tells stories, who brings joy to people's lives instead of just tearing them down. Howard's face was now bright red with fury. How dare you psychoanalyze me, you nobody? Nobody? Pedro laughed, but there was no humor in it. I may be nobody to you, but I know who I am. I know what I've accomplished, and I know that when I go home tonight, I can look at myself in the mirror with pride. Pride? Howard sputtered. Pride in what? Pretending to be other people? Pride in connecting with audiences. Pedro shot back. Pride in bringing characters to life that mean something to people. Pride in doing work that makes the world a little bit better instead of worse. Howard slammed his hand on the desk so hard that his coffee mug jumped. You think you're better than me? I think I'm different than you, Pedro replied calmly. I choose to build people up instead of tearing them down. I choose to create instead of destroy. Create? Howard's voice reached a new level of mockery. You don't create anything. You read lines that other people wrote while wearing costumes that other people made. Pedro shook his head sadly. If that's all you see when you look at acting, then I genuinely feel sorry for you, Howard. You've missed the entire point of what storytelling is supposed to be about. Don't you dare feel sorry for me, Howard snarled. I don't need pity from some wannabe movie star. I'm not a wannabe anything, Pedro said firmly. I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be. The question is, are you happy with who you are? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Howard's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. For the first time in the entire interview, he seemed genuinely rattled. Pedro picked up his jacket from the chair and looked directly into the camera. To anyone watching this who has dreams, who wants to create something, who wants to make art or tell stories, Pedro said directly to the viewers, don't let anyone convince you that your passion doesn't matter. Don't let bullies discourage you from pursuing what you love. He looked back at Howard one final time. And Howard, I hope someday you find something that brings you real joy, instead of just momentary satisfaction from hurting others. With that, Pedro Pascal walked out of the studio, leaving Howard Stern speechless for what might have been the first time in his entire career. The audience erupted in applause, and millions of viewers at home knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. A masterclass in dignity, grace, and standing up to a bully without becoming one yourself.